In today's journey, we take another whack at brewing beer in glass. Today's goes a bit better than the last time's as none of the beakers break, but it still ends up being a failure as you see later on. You may not have noticed it, but 30 seconds in and Phil's already made two mistakes, one of which ruins the brew day as a whole. First, he hit the overhead mic with the first water jug, and that's just rude. And second, he added too much water, so that we're going to have problems bringing it to a boil later. We do, however, still end up with a decent beer at the end, although not the beer we were intending. And we do miss a few sights and sounds along the way that we were hoping to see. And if this is the first time you're watching one of our videos, just be known that we will be using time distortion to fast forward through some of the slower parts. So now that we have 1.25 gallons in our vessel, we're going to start to bring it to about 163 degrees Fahrenheit to start the steeping process for our grains. For Phil's first trick today, he will be turning this clear water into whatever color it ends up, because I actually have no idea what's inside this bag. It was just one left over from another project before. But no need to let it go to waste, and today's more about testing the system than anything anyways. And seeing what is to be seen during the process of brewing in glass. For example, all of the sill that's falling out of this grain bag could have been avoided by shaking it beforehand. While not detrimental to the beer overall, it is one of the leading factors to that homebrew taste that people will talk about. This comes from the fact that when you go to remove the grain bag later on, the grain that fell out of the bag will not be removed before the boil, creating off flavors, though in small amounts. This color change, on the other hand, is what we want to see, and is from the hot steeping of the grains in the water. And because it has a nice orange tint to it, I'm going to assume that there is a decent amount of caramunich in there of some type or another. Which isn't really a good match to go with the about a pound of traditional dark dry malt extract that we mix in. Again, we're just using what we have laying around the studio right now to test the system. But what we can see is that when the dry malt extract is added, a lot of the finer particles of sugar like to naturally convect and mix in by themselves. It's when things come in with larger clumps due to the steam that makes it harder to mix. As does the 5 different thermal probes that are currently installed in here for testing our BrewPi remix, an automated data logger that we'll be using for future videos. But as Phil's about to prove by activating the stir plate, if you don't literally scrape the bottom of your brew pot, you may have malt extract stuck down there, which will scorch, burn, and create off flavors in your beer if you do not make sure it is removed and dissolved completely. These deposits of malt extract can also lead to burn marks and scarring on the bottom of your more traditional brew pots. But our non-traditional brew pot and heat source are going to have problems getting up to a complete boil thanks to the fact that, as mentioned earlier, Phil put too much water in. This is almost to a comical point as we reach the temperature of 212 degrees Fahrenheit and it refuses to move an inch further. So in traditional Phil fashion, instead of just removing a small amount of liquid, he decides to wait for the actual level to evaporate to the point where it will work for us. On a positive side note, though, Phil was able to get a decent amount of B-roll showing various parts of what's going on inside of the boil. And here we can see what is the closest thing we get to a hot break, as we never see that much bubbles show up again throughout the rest of the process. As Phil reached the do or die moment at about 3 o'clock in the morning, he decides to actually add the hops at this point, which is where he makes another mistake. As each of these additions should be 3 grams of Cascade each, they're in fact 1/3 of an ounce each, about 9.5 grams. For those doing the math, that is over 3 times the amount of hops that are supposed to be in each addition, which should have happened at 45 minutes, 30 minutes, and flame out. But we will be using the time distortion as usual to get you on with your day. But as you can see in this close-up shot, that it pays to at least use a muslin bag for your hops, if not a hop spider. It's really cool to have the free-flowing hops, but you're going to need some sort of filtration, otherwise all these are going to end up in the carboy later on. And if you listen closely, you can hear Phil having an epiphany in the moment. All that timing and planning. Phil now realizes that he planned out the entire layout of the wort chiller for working on the hot plate, which is still as hot as a stove right now. So right now, Phil's going to come up with a plan of trying to get the beaker onto the lab jack instead of the hot plate without getting burned or breaking anything. Phil's ingenious plan seems to be to take the edge off first with the wort chiller before sliding it over into the lab jack. And of course, that's no ordinary wort chiller. That is a wort chiller hooked up to 6 gallons of ice cold water that's being recirculated with an 8 liter a minute pump. It takes us about 10 minutes to get this down to a pitchable temperature. Can't wait till next time when we use it in high gear. But even though that this beer is a failure, this round was a success as we didn't break any glass and we saw that all of our tools we built specifically for brewing this way worked without a hitch. And that everything that went wrong was in fact Phil's fault. So join us next time when we find out an appropriate punishment for Phil for all of his failures. Here's some aftermath footage for those interested in seeing how it ended.